it seems to be getting underappreciated.
Yeah.
Because it's the second lowest opening that Pixar has ever had.
No. I am the father. And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat. This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained. I'm joined by Mr. Bone.
That's me.
Yeah. Cormick is joined once again.
Oh, yeah.
It's great. Today we are talking about Pixar's new film, Elemental, that came out a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
We finally went and saw it last Tuesday.
Yes.
Pretty good.
Yeah. I was just like, hey, you know what I'm feeling? Movie. Let's go do it.
And we did. It was great. It's kind of being a little underappreciated right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of sad. But we'll get more into that in just a little bit. But
True enough.
The story of it is pretty interesting, I think. Anyways, it's not a story they have told before. Although, it's with elements as people. Of course, they haven't told that story. But the main thing is that they're telling a second generation immigration story.
Yeah.
And so it's mainly all about the fire people. Although Wade, the water character, is still a main lead. He's not really the main focus.
Nope.
The main focus is the fire people, and specifically Ember. Which I think is great because I feel like they're the most interesting element to explore in this world anyway.
Certainly. Both the way they've written the story and visually.
Yeah, because they've kind of gotten a little bit of a forbidden lovers kind of story going.
It's got a lot of rom-com about it.
Yeah, and with it, they kind of explore how the different elements work. They give them different kinds of abilities, and what I find really interesting is how the fire people seem to actually be the most useful element, at least from our point of view, but they're the most discriminated against, which I think is a little ridiculous, because we're shown from the very start when they have pipes bursting, it's very easy. They can just melt it
and
back over, and it's fine.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
who needs to call a plumber when we got fire people?
Yeah, I'm like, excuse me, why does everyone hate the fire people? They're just so much better in their abilities from everybody else. Firepower.
Firepower. Oh, boy.
But it's interesting. I like how they did the different characters. I like how they built the world. And I like that with the world building and the discrimination kind of subtext to a lot of things, they also have the people who don't understand it, which is the water people.
Right.
Because in this world that has been built, the water people were the ones who founded it. They were the ones who started everything. So they're kind of the privileged white people of this world, essentially.
Certainly. Yeah, I'm very heavily related to the water folk because that is me.
Yeah, you're that's me. That's me right there.
He's literally me.
But so, everything in this world is kind of based around water, which is helpful to the other two elements, which were earth and cloud people.
Yeah.
But it's obviously not very helpful to the fire people to have water, which can very easily just extinguish them.
Right.
And so it's kind of interesting to see all this world building and have both sides of it, because I feel that's something we don't usually get in these kind of stories, is people understanding the privilege side of things.
Right.
It's just and it's good to show what the discrimination is, but you also have to be hey, you got to understand you're privileged. Yeah. Not everyone has it as good as you have it. And we've had stories from like Disney that have done that before, like Zootopia. That's very much
Yeah.
a similar kind of concept.
You get some vibes that are a little bit Zootopia-ish from from Elemental. For me particularly, it was like Bryson was explaining, how the city that Ember and her family have moved to is not at all catered to her, and it's kind of got its little divisions and stuff, and it's kind of like how the zoo city was made.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being said, it is cool to see that the elements aren't. It's not just a gimmick for the story. It's not just, oh, we put this veil on of elements so that we can tell a story in the subtext. There's reason and drive behind why they chose elements for this story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to see, because that was a lot of people's apprehension about this one. I think some folks are starting to get a little tired of the Pixar routine, which, I mean, personally, I have an extreme bias and never will. But that was a lot of apprehension where they're like, oh, great, now it's elements. But there's actually a lot of reasoning behind why there are elements and why they chose the characters that they wrote to be specific places in the story. And so it proves to be really helpful for driving the characters' like inner stories and inner monologues to grow, which is, what is a good thing for a film, And
Yeah.
So that was a big thing for me with the apprehension about it, where as I was watching, I was like, never mind, I don't have to worry about that at all.
Yeah, because it's not like, like you said, the Pixar kind of formula that has been things is giving things feelings. Toys have feelings. Fish have feelings. Monsters have feelings. Black people have feelings.
Right.
Feelings have feelings. And you kind of are expecting it to be, oh, elements have feelings, but that's not exactly it. It's just meant to be a device for an engaging story.
Mm-hmm.
It's still telling a story with the human experience in mind and taking an experience from individuals that have had this common experience and being like, hey, we want to tell a story that has elements of this.
Yeah.
Elemental.
Oh,
Blah. But
yeah.
I like how they do it.
That's almost a gripe that I have with that joke, because it's a funny joke. I mean, and it's very clear that, yes, that's kind of what it looks like. But really what it is that Pixar is really fantastic at writing stories about the human experience. And for me personally, they're especially in the animation world, they're the stories I can connect to the best. And that's why I love Pixar so much, is specifically their stories. Of course, their visuals have been legendary since they came, to father in 3D animation and whatnot, especially for feature-length films. But their stories beyond that are absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So to me, that joke is like, yeah, it's funny, but it doesn't just, especially in a lot of their films, and especially as of late, it doesn't just boil down to they give these things feelings.
No, they give them like actual stories, and it's meant to find a common experience that exists in the real world.
Oh, yeah.
And tell it in a very visually engaging way.
Exactly.
And I think Pixar, like you said, they have always kind of been the forefront of animation.
Right.
Really. Not necessarily. They didn't start off that way, but after they got introduced and everyone kind of started going through 3D, they led the frontier, essentially. And you could tell as their movies progress, because they're learning how to do different things. Each film is pretty much a new skill test for their software. It's meant to try something new. Think Nemo, it's water.
Yep.
In Monsters Inc., it's the hair on the on like Sully. In Toy Story, it's just meant to be animating characters. And since they look so plastic, that's why they made them toys. They were like, we can't really have a whole film of people that look plastic. It's not going to look right. So it makes more sense at the beginning when they all look really fake, let's make them toys.
Yep.
Because that's the most logical sense to do. And I like that they have continued to push that.
Oh, yeah.
They try to push the boundaries and keep trying new things. And I think in this one, they definitely did, especially between fire and water. Those I felt like had the most visually engaging animation designs.
For sure.
They had the most interesting effects, and it's very interesting to know how they did it. And I want it to come out on streaming services so that we can actually see the behind the scenes on how they did things, specifically with the fire people.
Oh, certainly.
Because theirs, to me, is the most interesting character design. Because Earth people make sense. They are solid objects, typically with plants added onto them. That is probably the easiest character design they had to do.
Yeah.
Clouds, not too hard. They already had cloud people in Inside Out that are very similar in design.
And even back in the short, I think it was for Up. Oh man, what's that called? But it's the short with where like the cloud folks are making things, and then storks go and take it.
Yes, I don't remember what it's called, but I know which one you're talking about.
Very similar to that.
Yeah, and so that one they already kind of have done, and then you have the water people, which I think was probably the second most challenging, because you're having to give water a character while still letting it
be fluid,
flow and move.
Yeah, it had some Luca about it for the water folks a little bit. But certainly not exactly like the Luca, because like you say, they had to personify the water.
And then you have to make them transparent, and you have to have light reflecting off them in different ways. But you also have to make sure it does still look like water, not just water in like a plastic form that's moving.
Right. Because
I think that's an issue that they very likely could have run into while making the character, was that it felt too rigid. It felt like it was in a shell instead of moving like water. But they ended up making it look really good, and they have movements every time they move even slightly. Water just moves everywhere.
Yeah.
But the fire people, they are the most interesting to me.
I could go watch it a second time just to observe them very closely.
Yeah. Because the fire designs in the movie, they have several elements to them that are just so fascinating. Because it's fire, you can't just have a solid object, because it makes sense for water and you had like a physics simulation essentially, but you can't really do that with fire. You have to be doing some kind of simulation to keep it moving, and it's just moving along a skeleton essentially. But then you have the transparency of fire, you have the light, you have the change like with wind and everything, because that can move the flame.
Environmental effect.
Exactly. And then you also have the little 2D effects that Pixar added onto the fire characters, because like most of the other characters, like eyes and everything still were 3D objects, but with the fire people specifically, because you wanted to still see each part of the flame, they added 2D strokes into it so that you could see it, as well as like being able to see noses, or when something's crossing over, it's easy to see where that is instead of just it's now all big jumble of fire.
It's like a character outline in classic 2D animation.
Exactly. And it's super interesting because I really want to know how they still kept their form, because fire can very easily change.
Yep.
It's very unpredictable, and they reflect that with a lot of the characters' personalities.
Oh, yeah. The written story, yeah.
But fire as a whole, simulated or otherwise, is very unpredictable because it's meant to just be random. But these characters manage to keep form while being fire, and they play with that all the time. And so it's fascinating to me, and I want to know exactly how they did it.
Yeah. I mean, and for as little as I know about an animation and like the actual process of animating something, I know that those characters, all the firefolk, probably had the most animators dedicated to them, because like you say, the other ones, they've for the most part been done a little bit more before.
Yeah.
And the Pixar teams, I imagine, have a lot more experience animating that. And it's a very intentional choice to make Fire the Fire character our main character, because that's really a big part of their visual showcase for this film.
Yeah.
And so it having as much screen time as it does makes a lot of sense.
And it's like with the story, it just plays so well because they have so many things they can do with it. Because the main character, Amber, she has a problem of having a temper, and she gets very fed up really quickly. and it causes her character to change color. It changes form. It becomes, instead of like a calm, collected form of like a
candle flame, maybe.
Yeah, like a humanoid fire, it forms into like a bonfire, and it turns purple because it's ridiculously hot. And then she's also able, like how we said earlier, they can melt pipes to fix leaks, or she has a thing for glass blowing. And
that was something I had no idea would happen, but it makes a huge amount of sense. Because, like I said, they didn't just have them be elements for the sake of them being elements. It feeds into her story so well, so well. And I had no idea. I was expecting zero from like that kind of thing where she would, pick up some sand and then start glass blowing and have that level of artistry to it, which is just absolutely fantastic to watch and makes me feel so inspired and joyful when it's happening. And
as creative people, you're like, oh, that's so cool that you can just do that. Because that's how it feels watching someone who's really skilled at what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
It can just be effortless. They can just do it as if it was nothing, and it blows anyone's mind. Even if you understand the process, you're like, how did you do that without taking like hours? Especially like glass blowing, because in the real world, that's a pain in the booty to try doing.
It's the opposite of an everyday act.
Exactly. And in this, it's just effortless. She just is like, oh yeah, we're just gonna heat up sand and there's a flower in a little orb.
And you're
I'm like,
what?
Excuse me? I'm like, that is cool. I want fire powers just so I could do things like that.
Yeah. Where's my flame on?
I want to be Johnny Storm. But it's so interesting that they use that so well in this. Pixar really wanted to give the elements their own personalities and abilities, but also use them to play into the story. Fire can be really beautiful with what it creates, because you can cover pipes, or you can blow glass. You can do very effective and helpful things.
I mean, it's a huge turning point in human history when we discovered fire. Yeah, it's an incredible tool.
But it's also one of the most dangerous tools, because when let out of hand or gone out of control from like temper in this movie, it can set everything ablaze, and it sets everything going in the story. Because she loses her temperature,
Same idea.
Kind of works. Because she loses her temper, she causes a little bit of an explosion and causes pipes in her place to start leaking, which kind of propels everything, and how she meets Wade and how all the love story gets going, and all the
call
conflict.
to adventure. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I like that they wanted to use it to actually play with the story. It wasn't just, oh, let's do a little gimmick, because I think that's what kind of happens a lot in animation now is let's do it for the gimmick and not for any storytelling purpose.
Right.
And I think that, especially with the case of the 2D elements, it was meant with a specific purpose so that the fire people were easier to understand and could express more.
Yeah.
But not every story is going to do that. And I think Spider-Verse has kind of caused this.
For sure.
Because they mixed 2D and 3D so well, people want to jump on that train. And I understand why, but it doesn't fit every story.
No.
And Pixar, they will do it well, as shown, however much they do it.
Right.
It doesn't fit all of their stories. In this one, it would not have made sense to blend it completely.
Right, yeah. If they did the other characters, like the other elements, if they used some 2D stuff with them as much as they did, it would have felt out of place, for sure.
Exactly. Because that's not the kind of story it is. Pixar could tell a story where it's useful.
Sure, absolutely.
But in this, you want those realistic visuals and realistic physics.
For realistic elements.
Exactly, for realistic elements. And I think companies are hopping onto this trend not entirely well. Disney, in particular,
oh man,
is not understanding why. They're not understanding the why.
Yeah.
Because
they don't put enough dedication into understanding
exactly.
why.
It's more of a brand, like we've talked about before.
Yeah.
Because, so if you've seen the new trailer for Disney's new movie, Wish, that's going to be coming out, it is meant to be a kind of 2D, 3D looking thing.
Right.
It looks so bad.
Yeah.
I'm sure the story will be fine.
Right.
And the music will be great because it's Disney. They know what they're doing when it comes to musicals. But the visual aspect is so bad.
It's just off-putting. It doesn't feel in place at all.
Exactly. And it's still that same Disney 3D style, just everything kind of run through like a 2D filter.
Yeah.
Is what it seems to look like.
Yeah. When we were talking about it, Bryson was like, it's almost as if they were animating it in classic, like Frozen, Moana looking style, just that 3D Disney. And then they were like, well, maybe we should jump onto this 2D thing. And so like they just kind of, all right, let's do it then. And then like switched it. This is what it looks like. Yeah, obviously, don't know that.
Yeah.
But it, especially in the trailer where there's this inconsistency that Bryson has talked to me about, where it's like some of it looks pretty okay. Like, okay, I can see that. And then it's like, that looks like it belongs on TV at best.
Yeah. It looks like one of those straight to DVD sequels that Disney used to do.
It does. I don't get it.
And I think it could be better.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing Disney, knowing the kind of breakthroughs they've made before, they could do better.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of disappointing to see them just be like, let's just do it because they're doing it for the gimmick and not for a reason why.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's making it so hard to want to watch it.
Right, or to root for it in any way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely just tied in with that brand. And I feel like a common thing for Pixar is that there's a Pixar brand and everything's kind of similar with Pixar. And I can totally see it. I can understand why people have that gripe with Pixar.
Right, where they keep their style pretty uniform for sure.
But I do think that with Pixar's future, they are going to be experimenting. Elemental shows that.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're starting to mix that 2D. And I'm not saying that they should completely do it.
Right.
What I'm saying is that experimentation should be made.
Yeah.
Just like how Spider-Verse does it. Just like how Puss in Boots: The Last Wish does it. Arcane. Things that are challenging what the norm is. And Pixar started off doing that.
Yeah.
They've kind of gotten into a bit of a rhythm.
Sure.
But with Elemental, it seems to give me hope that they understand that they need to try new things.
Right. It drives their creativity, which is another thing that I admire about Pixar. I truly think Pixar is one of the perfect companies in the U.S. Just going to say it.
Cormick is a Pixar shill.
I really am.
Doesn't matter what they create.
I will defend them anytime.
Yeah. I think it's good that Pixar is understanding that things need to change, and they understand the why of things need to change.
They're really good at understanding why.
Exactly. And I think that's why Pixar has thrived for so long, is because their stories have a why to them. It's not just entertainment. There is a reason for the story, and that reason is what everything is based on.
Yeah, one of the best ways I had heard it described is, I mean, if you didn't know, Disney and Pixar are two different animation studios. They're just, partnered up, and Disney owns like the titles and the universes and stuff.
They own the distribution, essentially. Yeah. That's how they are with Marvel. It's how they are with Star Wars. It's how they are with National Geographic. Yeah. They own like everything now. It's how they are with all the Fox Century stuff. Yeah, yeah. But one of the the best way I've heard it described to me or read it, whatever, is that Disney stories, they tend to be once upon a time, which is great. I mean, everybody loves a once upon a time story. Certainly geared towards children, certainly how they began. Pixar stories tend to be a what if. Mm-hmm. What if toys could talk? What if monsters weren't so mean? What if, that kind of thing. And it proves to be a more impactful story to a more, especially age-ranged audience. Because it's more engaging to have a what if, because it gets your mind flowing, because you yourself can ask that question.
Yeah.
Everybody in the world, because this is just how humans are built. We ask why. We ask, what if this was this way? What if we did this instead? That's an engaging thought that everyone has throughout their entire lives. Not everyone is like, once upon a time I had the most perfect life. And I'm like, that's not how humans are.
No.
And so
But we do love to tell those stories.
Yes.
That's not to say that those are bad stories. It's just a different story for a different audience. Well,
Exactly.
and certainly, there's some overlap and probably a large overlap. I mean, obviously, but it is different. And it is, for me personally, why Pixar always wins.
Yeah. It's pretty good. And which is interesting because although Pixar does do this really well, in stories like Elemental, it seems to be getting underappreciated.
Yeah.
Because it's the second lowest opening that Pixar has ever had, aside from Toy Story. But Toy Story was their first release. They weren't a big name yet.
Yeah. But
it feels a little interesting and kind of discrediting to all of the people that were behind it, because it's a good story.
it really is. I left it, and like Bryson and like I've been saying, I mean, Pixar is a huge part of my entertainment faction, I guess. And I left it thinking like, wow, like where am I going to rank this among my Pixar? And then really, I mean, just ask Bryson. I was kind of like, it was a crisis where I was like, I don't even know if I can rank Pixar movies against each other. Like, where am I putting this movie, man?
Yeah, because they're all just
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
It's
something that we kind of talked about with the Flanagan episode, where it's just hard to compare when they're both really, really good.
They're all just good in their own ways, and
Yeah.
they each have good and bad things about them.
Yeah.
And it's understandable to put any of them as your favorites.
Oh, yeah.
But it's kind of interesting to see where Pixar is going to go, because I know their next one, what is it called? Elio?
Yeah.
Elio. Where it's the alien one, which I think is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it's exciting. Things like Alien is really easy to get creative with visually.
Yeah, because it's outer space. Anything can happen in outer space,
Literally
pretty
anything.
much.
Literally anything.
Like, think of all the great space stories that we get, because we get Star Wars, you get Treasure Planet, you get Scooby-Doo and the Alien Invaders, like we've been watching, because we've been watching all the classic Scooby-Doo movies.
Yeah,
They're freaking great.
For sure.
But it's with that, they can tell creative stories, and they can expand their boundaries. So I'm very interested to think what kind of stories they're going to tell next, because I feel like I'm always surprised whenever Pixar announces their new movies. I'm like, I was not expecting them to do that, but this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I was just about to say, for me, as much as I do love Pixar, they're very difficult to predict.
Yeah.
Very difficult to predict.
Because, as you said, Disney has that once upon a time thing. You can almost guarantee with
no matter what they put in the trailer, you're like, okay.
Whatever it is, there's going to be a once upon a time kind of story. There's going to be, once upon a time, there was a person who lived in a video game. Da-da-da-da-da. And it's just anything. And so Disney is pretty easy to predict.
Yeah.
But I feel like Pixar, because of their what if, they can apply it to anything. So like, what if we did this? What if we did this?
And like, so what if they did that? I want to know.
Yeah, and so it's going to be interesting to see what they choose next.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we kind of have come to the conclusion of our episode. But before that, remember, we have the question of the week. And because we were talking about Pixar today, of course, we're going to have to kind of make Cormick rank something. What is your favorite Pixar movie and why? If you have a favorite and you can explain why, please let us know either down in the Spotify comments or anywhere you're listening, or even on our Instagram.
Yeah.
So,
and if your why is just cause, that's why.
Exactly. That works too.
Yeah.
So, Cormick, what is your favorite Pixar movie?
Right. And I've been asked this many times because anytime animation comes up, I always lead into Pixar, and I always get into the whole Disney Pixar conversation, and people are like, wow, I didn't know that. That's not average information. I'm like, oh, well, it should be. Anyway.
Well, it should be.
It's changed over, as they've released films for a really long time. All throughout my childhood, really, it was Ratatouille. Ratatouille was my favorite. It was in large part because of a nostalgic connection to it. It was me and my brothers. We would watch that all the time. We just, and it's a good story. Paris has always been a place that I would really love to visit. There's literally a Lego Eiffel Tower behind me.
Yeah.
It just was one of those stories where I could, anytime somebody was like, want to watch Ratatouille, is like, even if I watched it 20 minutes before, absolutely I do. It just made me feel good. Well, pretty much every Pixar movie does that. It just, it had that connection because of my brothers and I. And then when the trailer for Soul came out, I was like, uh-oh.
Contender.
Yeah, I was like, that's going to be amazing.
A new challenger.
Yeah, exactly. And so Soul, I would say currently, Soul has to be my favorite one. And I would be, just because of the conversation it deals with, and it's really, I'd be pressed to see that get changed anytime soon, especially. And like that was part of my crisis with Elemental, where I was like, oh, I really, really like, this is the type of story, like if I were a creator, this is the type of story I'd really love to tell. So I attached with it really, really quickly and loved every second of Elemental. But just the story that's told and the conversation that happens within Soul, both, literally where they're talking about, meaning of life, purposes, and then when he says, oh, you humans, when you're so simple with your purposes, I was like, dang, that's deep. It just, the story is, and always has been with Pixar, a big thing like we've been talking about. So Soul would have to be my favorite. And then I have to mention, just real quick, again with my brothers, Onward hit hard.
Yeah, you told me about that one a lot.
It hit so hard. I love Onward a lot. So, I mean, as it sits right now, it's got to be Soul, Onward, and Elemental. Those are real high for me in my Pixar rankings.
Nice. I wasn't expecting you to fully rank them.
Yeah, I know. I like we
because he keeps going back and forth.
As after watching Elemental, I've really been wrapping it. It's been occupying my mind a lot.
Yeah. Soul's a really good one. I loved that one when that one came out. The Christmas of 2020, I think.
Yeah,
because that was.
It was a straight to streaming.
Yeah, it was straight to streaming, and they were just like, we're going to have this released for Christmas. And I remember, I think I watched it for the first time on Christmas.
Yep.
Because I was like, sick.
I remember sitting down watching it with my family like, dang.
This is a good one.
This was deep.
With the smooth jazz.
Oh, dude. Oh, I love
wonderful. Yeah. So, Soul's really good. I think everyone knows my favorite.
Nah, I certainly do.
Yeah. I've talked about it. I have a whole episode on this one. I've talked about it in several episodes. WALL-E is by far my favorite Pixar film.
It's fantastic.
Exactly. I love the cute little love story between WALL-E, who's like kind of shy, but he's like, ooh, this new very pretty high-tech robot. I love her. I'm like, that is adorable. That's so cute. But then you also have the really cool visual storytelling aspects of the characters not having a lot of dialogue. It's really just all about the visuals. You have to understand why WALL-E survived when no one else really did. It's just very interesting to me, and I love it.
And it's a really wonderful example of show don't tell.
Exactly. I remember when I first watched it, I remember seeing it in the theater, and I think we saw it in 3D, I'm pretty sure.
I bet.
It was epic. It was so cool. I was like, this is awesome. It's just the robots and everything. I find it so fascinating, and I love the creative process that went behind it and all the story elements, and I think that's why WALL-E has to be at the top for me. It's just impeccable. And I also really love Ratatouille. I think I grew up with that one a lot. That one and Monsters, Inc. I think we're definitely the top three for me. I don't know if Ratatouille and Monsters, Inc. would stay up there now, but they were all up there at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are our favorite Pixar movies. If you have a favorite, please let us know. I'm really curious to find out what you think is the best.
I honestly want as many comments as we can get about this one. I'm always down for a conversation about Pixar, and I know the popular ones tend to be like Up, and WALL-E's a pretty popular one too, but I know Up is a favorite for a lot of people. So
yeah.
If that's yours, tell us.
Let us know. But yeah, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for coming with and listening to us talk about Pixar and Elemental. Until next time, this is Easily Entertained.
You have been entertained.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Easily Entertained. If you enjoyed, be sure to tune back in Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, where we're available on all podcast platforms. And if you want all the latest updates on all things entertainment, check us out on social media for Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. And until next time, this is Easily Entertained.